Some men are born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Others are born to die by cannon fire at age 14 on a blood-soaked deck. Elias Finch, a cabin boy, didn't know which category he belonged to. But today, aboard the burning warship Indomitable, he had a choice to make that would determine his fate. He could either run and try to save himself, or he could lend a helping hand to the most feared pirate in the Caribbean. The choice he made would be the beginning of history, or the end. A tongue of gray fog licked across the splintered deck, tasting of saltpeter and fresh blood. Elias Finch, 14, freckled and far from home, pressed his spine to the forecastle ladder and wondered how many heartbeats he had left. The dawn bell had not rung. Instead, the air itself told with distant cannons still coughing their final rounds. Somewhere astern, the Indomitable's powder magazine hissed like a kettle about to scream. He clutched the short naval sword his father had bartered for in Kingston's back alleys. The grip was slick, sweat, not seawater, and the blade shook in rhythm with his knees. Around his boots lay the bodies of men who had known how to wield steel better than he ever would. One of them, a powder-blackened gunner, stared at Elias with a single blue eye that seemed to ask why a child still breathed when seasoned sailors did not. The fog parted just long enough to reveal the stranger. Tall, bare-chested beneath a torn coat, wrists raw from iron shackles recently struck away. He knelt among the fallen, weaponless except for a snapped or handle splintered into a crude stake. A tattoo coiled up his forearm, black tentacles writhing around a bleeding heart. Elias recognized it at once. The mark of Captain Rowan Blackwater, the pirate every Navy captain had sworn to hang from the yardarm until the seagulls picked his bones clean. A musket ball whined overhead, splintering the mainmast. Elias flinched. Blackwater did not. The pirate's eyes, storm-cloud gray, found the boy across the carnage. In them Elias saw no plea, only calculation, as if the man were counting the seconds until the deck itself became a grave. Behind them, enemy boots thudded against the hull. The second wave of boarders had arrived sooner than any lookout predicted. 20 shadows, maybe 30, poured over the rails like ink spilled across parchment. Their leader, a Lieutenant Elias had once served watered grog to, shouted orders in clipped terror. "Find the crate! Kill anyone between you and it." The crate. Elias's stomach lurched. Below decks, in the surgeon's converted storeroom, sat a brass-bound box stamped with the East India Company crest. Inside, rumor claimed, rested a cannon small enough to be carried by 2 men, yet powerful enough to punch through a frigate's hull beneath the waterline. The Navy wanted it. The pirates wanted it. And now the boy with trembling fingers held the only clear path between them. Blackwater rose slowly, testing the weight of the oar handle. It would snap against steel like kindling. Elias looked from the pirate to his own sword, then to the advancing enemy silhouettes outlined by cannon flash. His mind raced through every sea story his grandmother had whispered by lamplight. Tales of honor, betrayal, and the thin red lines separating hero from corpse. A gout of flame erupted from the quarterdeck. Burning sailcloth rained in fiery ribbons. The heat kissed Elias's cheeks, and in its glow the tattooed kraken seemed to writhe alive. Blackwater took one deliberate step forward, boots squelching in a puddle that reflected both sky and hellfire. He extended his empty hand, palm up, toward the boy. Time folded into a heartbeat. Elias could drop the sword and run for the ladder, maybe reach the longboat before the magazine blew. Or he could slide the blade across the deck, arming the most feared pirate on the Spanish Main, and pray the stories about Blackwater's twisted sense of gratitude were true. Either choice carried the taste of gunpowder and the smell of coming winter in its wake. Another musket cracked. The ball struck inches from Elias's boot, spraying splinters into his calf. Pain flared, sharp and bright, but it was the lieutenant's voice that froze his blood. "Cabin boy! Stand aside or share their fate." Elias met Blackwater's eyes one last time. In them he saw not the monster of Navy broadsides but a man cornered by betrayal, weighing the same impossible odds. The deck tilted as the Indomitable groaned beneath its mortal wounds. Salt spray hissed across the boards, mixing with blood until the lines between ocean and slaughter blurred. With fingers that no longer trembled, Elias flipped the sword so the hilt faced the pirate. Steel scraped across oak, a whisper lost beneath cannon thunder. The gesture took less than a second, yet it felt like surrendering the last fragment of childhood he possessed. Blackwater's fingers closed around the grip. For the first time, the pirate smiled. A small, crooked thing that promised nothing and everything in the same breath. Behind them, the enemy line advanced, bayonets gleaming like shark teeth in the smoky dawn. The deck lurched. Somewhere below, the first keg of powder caught fire with a sound like the world cracking open. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, counting down moments he might never see. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the choice was made. If you were Elias, 14, terrified and standing on the edge of two wars, would you trust the monster to save you, or trust yourself to outrun the coming blast? Tell me in the comments, because what happens next depends on which voice you choose to follow. Splinters the size of daggers still rained from the shattered mainmast when Elias Finch, 14, freckled and far from home, pressed his back to the forecastle ladder and tasted gunpowder on his tongue. The Indomitable had survived the night's cannonade, but only just. Her deck was a slaughter yard of fallen Marines and tangled rigging, and the air itself felt wounded, too heavy to breathe. Across the carnage, a stranger knelt among the dead. Tall, bare-chested beneath a torn naval coat. He clutched a splintered oar handle as if it were a scepter. Sunlight, thin, watery, reluctant, caught the tattoo on his forearm. A black kraken coiled around a bleeding heart. Elias knew that mark. Every sailor from Kingston to Cartagena knew it. Captain Rowan Blackwater, the pirate who sank company ships for sport, the man whose bounty could buy a small island. Yet here he was, weaponless, wrists raw from iron shackles recently struck away, eyes storm-cloud gray and fixed on Elias with a look that was not pleading, only measuring, calculating, waiting. Behind them, the enemy's second wave thundered across the deck. 20 shadows, maybe 30, poured over the rails like ink spilled across parchment. Their leader, a Lieutenant Elias had once served watered grog to, brandished a boarding axe and shouted orders in clipped terror. "Find the crate! Kill anyone between you and it!" The crate. Elias's stomach lurched. Below decks, in the surgeon's converted storeroom, sat a brass-bound box stamped with the East India Company crest. Inside, rumor claimed, rested a cannon small enough for 2 men to carry yet powerful enough to punch through a frigate's hull beneath the waterline. The Navy wanted it. The pirates wanted it. And now the boy with trembling fingers held the only clear path between them. A musket ball whined overhead, splintering the foremast. Elias flinched. Blackwater did not. The pirate's gaze flicked to the short naval sword hanging at Elias's hip, a gift from a dying gunner, a blade Elias barely knew how to hold. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Elias understood the choice laid bare by fate and fire. He could draw the sword and defend the crate, die a hero's death before the magazine blew. Or he could slide the blade across the blood-slick planks, arming the most feared pirate on the Spanish Main, and pray the stories about Blackwater's twisted sense of gratitude were true. The deck tilted. Timbers groaned. From below came the wet hiss of rising water and the sharper hiss of burning fuse. Smoke curled in acrid ribbons, stinging eyes, tasting of endings. Rowan's empty hand lifted, palm up, a silent question. "Will you trust me?" Elias's fingers tightened on the grip. The metal was warm, warm as the blood soaking his boots, warm as the sun he might never see again. Overhead, the flag snapped in a wind that smelled of gunpowder and coming winter. Behind the pirate, the lieutenant's axe flashed in the smoke. "Cabin boy, stand aside or share their fate." Elias met Blackwater's eyes. In them he saw not the monster of Navy broadsides but a man cornered by betrayal, weighing the same impossible odds. With fingers that no longer trembled, Elias flipped the sword so the hilt faced the pirate. Steel scraped across oak, a whisper lost beneath cannon thunder. Rowan's fingers closed around the grip. For the first time, the pirate smiled. A small, crooked thing that promised nothing and everything in the same breath. Behind them, The enemy line advanced, bayonets gleaming like shark teeth in the smoky dawn. The deck lurched. Somewhere below, the first keg of powder caught fire with a sound like the world cracking open. If you were Elias, 14, terrified, and standing on the edge of two wars, would you trust the monster to save you, or trust yourself to outrun the coming blast? Tell me in the comments, because what happens next depends on which voice you choose to follow. The surgeon's storeroom had once smelled of tar and rum. Now it reeked of iron and fear. Elias stepped through the splintered doorframe and felt the air change, thicker, as if the lantern's flames sucked oxygen from lungs instead of shadows from corners. Behind him, Rowan Blackwater's boots left prints of blood and salt water on the oak planks. Each step a countdown neither man voiced. Across the cramped space, the brass-bound crate squatted like a malignant idol. East India crest stamped on every face, lock the size of a man's fist, and chains looped through iron rings as though even the wood feared what it carried. A smaller box, no longer than Elias's forearm, rested on top, lid cracked just enough for a child's finger to slip through. From that slit drifted the faint clink of metal on metal, and a sound more terrifying. Shallow, terrified breathing, Elias knelt. Through the gap he saw them, 5, maybe 6 pairs of dark eyes reflecting lantern light like trapped stars. Children, shackled wrist to wrist, ankles raw where iron had kissed skin to bone. The nearest, a girl no older than 9, lifted a finger to her lips. The universal plea, quiet, cut deeper than any blade. Rowan's shadow fell across the crate. The pirate's face, usually carved from sea-storm stone, cracked open with something Elias had never seen. Shame. He reached for the smaller box, but his hand froze an inch from the latch. "This wasn't the cargo," he whispered. "This wasn't what they paid me to steal." Behind them, the ship groaned, a dying leviathan. Timbers splintered as fire found the powder magazine one deck above. Heat bled through the planks overhead in pulsing waves, each hotter than the last. Water, ankle-deep and rising, reflected the flames so the room seemed to burn from below. Elias's mind raced. He could smash the lock, free the children, and risk trapping them all when the magazine blew. Or he could leave the crate, drag Rowan topside, and pray the longboat still floated. Choice tasted like copper on his tongue. A new voice slithered from the doorway. "Touch that box and you'll hang beside Blackwater." Lieutenant Griggs stepped into the lantern glow, pistol steady but eyes wild. His coat, once crisp navy blue, now dripped crimson from a shoulder wound. Behind him, 2 Marines leveled bayonets at Rowan's chest. Griggs's lip curled. "Company pays me by the head. Children fetch prime coin in Havana. You want to be a hero, cabin boy? Fine. Die with them." He gestured toward the rising water. "Or step aside and maybe live to see another sunrise." Rowan's knuckles whitened on the sword Elias had returned. "You sold your own cargo," he growled. "Signed the manifest yourself." The pirate's voice carried the rasp of betrayal, a man learning his employer had built the gallows before the voyage began. The girl in the crate pressed her face to the slit. "Please," she mouthed, the words soundless but louder than cannon fire. Her free hand pointed to the smaller box. A single word, barely audible, "key." Elias's fingers found the tiny chest. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a brass key no longer than his thumb. Ornate, East India crest engraved, clearly meant for the larger lock. But also inside, a folded parchment sealed with crimson wax. The wax bore not the company mark, but the sigil of the royal governor, authorization for special cargo, signed in a hand Elias recognized from wanted posters nailed in every Jamaican port. The revelation hit like a rogue wave. This wasn't smuggling. It was state-sanctioned slavery disguised as indenture. Griggs wasn't a greedy officer. He was the governor's blade, paid in blood money. Above them, the magazine hatch blew open. A tongue of flame licked down, igniting tar between the planks. Water surged higher, now at Elias's waist. The children whimpered, chains clinking like distant bells. Rowan locked eyes with Elias. "One cut, boy." Key turns, chains drop. "We all swim or we all burn." His voice carried the weight of every sin he'd ever sailed under. Griggs cocked the pistol. Last chance, cabin boy. Step aside or join the cargo. Steam hissed where fire met water. The ship listed violently. Crates slid, children screamed. Elias felt the choice crystallize. Not between hero and coward, but between being complicit or being human. He palmed the key, its brass edges biting skin. Behind him, the girl's breathing steadied, as if she sensed the moment pivot. Griggs's finger tightened on the trigger. Rowan's sword rose, a silver promise. The deck lurched again. Timbers cracked like breaking bone. If you were Elias, ankle deep in rising doom, holding the key to 5 children's futures, would you risk everything to unlock their chains, knowing it might seal your own? Tell me below, because the next sound you hear could be the explosion that ends every story. The powder magazine hissed like a nest of vipers ready to strike. Elias knelt in ankle-deep seawater that had begun to boil where burning tar dripped from above. 30 feet of flaming deck separated him from the longboat. 30 inches of sizzling fuse separated every soul aboard from oblivion. The brass-bound crate stood open at his feet, its secrets spilled across the slanted planks. Not a cannon but 5 children. Eyes huge, wrists bleeding, chains locked through iron rings bolted to the floorboards. The youngest, Amaya, clutched a tin cup like a shield and stared at the fuse coiled inside the crate beside her. One spark, one lick of flame, and the hidden keg beneath them would turn children into memory. Elias's fingers found the key, small, brass, warm from his pocket. Rowan had slipped it to him with a look that said, "Choose better than I ever did." The key fit the lock, but it also fit something Rowan hadn't told him. A spring-loaded striker inside the crate lid. Turn it, and the fuse would leap to life. Leave it, and the rising fire above would finish the job in minutes. Water sloshed higher, steaming now, licking at Elias's shins. The deck buckled. A beam crashed aft, sending sparks in a fiery snowfall. Through the smoke, Rowan appeared, shirt blackened, left arm hanging useless, blood painting pirate tattoos red. He dropped to one knee, breath ragged. "Fuse is dual-triggered," he rasped. Key turns, striker hits, boom. Fire reaches it, boom. Either way, 30 seconds. Amaya's fingers brushed Elias's sleeve. Her voice, small but steady, "We trust you." The words hit harder than cannon recoil. Elias looked at Rowan, legend, killer, savior. Then at the fuse spitting sparks like angry stars. 30 seconds. Rowan's good hand closed over Elias's. "I'll hold the striker down. You cut the fuse. If I slip," he shrugged, a crooked smile that knew endings. "Better 1 than 6. Elias drew the short naval sword. The blade trembled, reflecting orange flames and terrified faces. He could hack the fuse, but the striker might still spark. He could run, save himself, let the story write itself in smoke and rumor. The deck lurched. A thunderous crack overhead warned the mainmast would topple any heartbeat now. Amaya reached into the crate and lifted the fuse gently, threading it through her small fingers until the hissing tip rested an inch from her palm. Tears cut clean tracks through soot on her cheeks, but her eyes never left Elias's. "Quick!" she whispered. Rowan braced his boot against the crate, hand clamped over the striker mechanism, muscles corded, sweat sizzling on contact with hot metal. "Now, lad!" Elias raised the sword. In its surface he saw every choice he'd ever made and every one he hadn't. He saw his mother's face the day he ran to sea, saw the empty hammocks of friends who wouldn't see tomorrow. He saw the horizon, wide, waiting, unfinished. The fuse hissed louder, a serpent tasting air. 20 seconds. He sliced. Steel met cord. Sparks flew. The severed fuse fell into the water with a hiss that sounded like the world exhaling. Rowan's shoulders sagged. The striker remained mercifully silent. Then the deck split. A beam crashed between them, fire licking at the crate's edge. Water surged, lifting the children in their chains. Elias plunged the sword through the hasp, twisting with all the strength terror could lend. The lock snapped. Chains clattered free. Rowan grabbed Amaya. Elias scooped the smallest boy, and together they stumbled toward the gaping hole where daylight bled through smoke. The ship groaned. a final, mournful note. Then rolled, they burst onto the slanted deck as the Indomitable gave her death cry. Flames leapt skyward. The sea rushed in. Elias leapt first, children clutched to his chest. Rowan followed, one-armed, eyes blazing with something brighter than fire. Cold water slapped them awake. The longboat, miraculously still tethered, bobbed 20 feet away. Elias kicked, arms burning, salt stinging every cut. Behind them, the frigate, folded in on herself like a burning cathedral, mast and memory swallowed by the same sea that had birthed her. They reached the boat as the last mast tip vanished beneath a wreath of steam and smoke. Rowan collapsed against the gunwale, breath shallow, blood blooming in the water around him. "Told you," he rasped. "Sometimes the monster saves the children." Elias looked back at the swirling wreckage. The fuse lay silent somewhere in the deep. Amaya crawled forward and pressed the brass key into his palm. Warm still, salt-stained, but no longer a death sentence. The horizon glowed gold, wide, waiting if you were Elias. Ship gone, legend bleeding beside you, 5 children watching. Would you raise sail toward empire or vanish into the wide unknown? Tell me in the comments, because the tide is turning and every choice writes the next chapter. Dawn bled gold across the shattered sandbar, as if the ocean itself held its breath to admire what stubborn courage had wrought. Smoke still rose in thin ribbons from the Indomitable's broken spine, but the fire was gone, starved by tide and triumph. Children huddled ankle-deep in warm shallows, chains lying open like shed serpent skins. Their wrists ringed red, yet their faces lit by a sun they had feared they'd never see again. Elias knelt in the wet sand, lungs raw, heart hammering a rhythm he did not yet recognize as victory. Behind him, Rowan Blackwater leaned on a driftwood spar that had once been the mainmast, blood crusting the edge of his smile. The pirate who had sailed under black flags now looked more priest than plunderer, eyes reflecting the miracle he had helped birth. One by one, the freed children approached. The girl with the silent plea, her name, they learned, was Amaya, pressed a small, salt-stiff hand to Elias's cheek. No words. None were needed. The touch carried every thank you the world could hold. When she stepped back, the others formed a half-moon around them, barefoot in the surf, solemn as any congregation. Rowan broke the silence. His voice, usually edged with thunder, came soft. "Ship's yours now, cabin boy." He lifted the battered naval sword. "Its nicks now stories, its stains now badges," and turned the hilt toward Elias. "Command isn't given. It's taken. And you took it when you chose them over yourself." Elias's fingers closed around the grip. It felt heavier than before, not with steel but with futures. In that instant he saw his own reflection in the blade. Soot-striped, freckle-sharp, no longer a child. Salt wind tugged his hair like a blessing. A gull wheeled overhead, crying once, then arrowing toward the open sea. Rowan followed it with his gaze. "The world's wide," he said. "Wider when you've got a crew who'd follow you into fire." Behind them, the longboat, miraculously intact, bobbed beside the wreck. 4 of the older boys were already bailing it out with coconut shells and broken helmets, their laughter cracking through morning air like new sails snapping full of wind. Rowan stooped, scooped a handful of wet sand, and let it run through his fingers. "Every grain here is a second chance," he mused. "We just have to decide what we'll build with them." Elias looked back at the Indomitable's carcass one last time. The hull that had once ruled waves now cradled sunrise instead of cannon smoke. He thought of the powder magazine that should have killed them all, how a single brass key and a boy's refusal to look away had turned death into deliverance. Amaya tugged his sleeve. She pointed east, where the sky blushed rose and coral. There, low on the horizon, 3 white sails stitched a promise across the dawn. Imperial colors, but still too distant to threaten. Yet, Rowan's grin returned, crooked and wolfish. "Company's coming. Question is, will they find pirates to hang, or heroes to hail?" Elias stood taller. The sword rested easy at his hip now, its weight a covenant. "We'll decide that when they arrive," he said, and the words carried no tremor. "For now, we sail with the tide." One by one, The children clambered into the longboat. Their whispers rose like gull wings, naming the boat Sunrise, arguing over who would helm, who would cook, who would sing the old songs their mothers had hushed them with. In their voices lived every tomorrow stolen and reclaimed. Rowan paused at the gunwale, offering Elias a hand up. "You lead, Captain Finch." "Captain." The title settled on Elias's shoulders like sunlight, warm, dazzling, impossible to ignore. He took Rowan's hand, felt the calluses of 100 battles pass their strength into his own small palm. As the oars bit water, the sandbar shrank to a golden memory, and the open sea stretched ahead, blue, boundless, and burning with possibility. Behind them, the first Imperial cutter crested the swell, its pennant snapping in the wind like a question. "Mark." Elias lifted the sword in silent salute. Not a threat, an invitation. "Come see what courage can do." The longboat rose on a gentle wave, and for a heartbeat Elias felt the universe inhale. In that breath lived every sunrise he would ever watch from a quarterdeck, every child who would ever look to him the way Amaya had looked today. He tasted salt and freedom in equal measure. Rowan's voice floated back, soft enough only for Elias to hear. "Your story's just begun, lad. Make it worth the telling." As the boat sliced east toward the endless horizon, Elias raised his voice. Not a shout, but a promise carried on salt wind. To every soul still in chains we're coming, and somewhere, far beyond the curve of the world, the sails kept coming, white, relentless, and full of tomorrow. If this ending lit a fire in your chest, smash subscribe and sail with us to the next tale, where a single lantern in a storm saves a fleet from pirates. Watch now, and drop a comment telling Elias which name he should carve on Sunrise's bow. The journey isn't over. It's only just begun.